In this course, we will explore our current knowledge of the human brain as a tool for thinking. The course is essentially a giant exercise in so-called metacognition, or thinking about thinking itself. It endeavors to give you the skills of what we call critical thinking. Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. The motto for this course could be, the unexamined thought is not worth thinking. What's at stake with all of this? Well, science and belief permeate our lives. They permeate our culture, our civilization. We, for example, face environmental issues. Is there global warming? Is the planet warming up, for example? And if so, are we causing it? And what can we do about it? What future technologies should we invest our very limited resources into? If we make the correct choices about where to invest, then there's a lot to gain. If we skills and the experience necessary to perform well as a football player in the NFL. You should no more expect to be born a highly developed critical thinker than you should expect someone to be born a violinist or somebody who can play in the NFL. These are all skills and abilities that need to be developed over years and practiced in order to be good at critical thinking. Humans tend to make a lot of errors in thinking. Our inherent tendency, again, this evolved pathways of least resistance, include a lot of flaws in thinking. Flaws in logic are one example. We call these logical fallacies. We tend to make logical connections that are not valid, that are not real. Our thinking is also plagued with many false assumptions. Our heads are filled with facts, things that we know to be true, but in fact are false. Either they're just out and out wrong, or they're just assumptions that may or may not be true, but we really don't know. Our memories are also massively flawed. We tend to naively assume that our memories are an accurate passive recorder of what has happened, when in fact our memories are plagued with numerous flaws that make them highly unreliable. And there are things that psychologists call heuristics, which are down and dirty rules of thumb or imagine if we can replace all of the fossil fuels that are both expensive and that are putting carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the air. Imagine if we could replace that with something as simple as water. Essentially, what the process that they keep reinventing over and over again is to electrolyze water, meaning separate water into its oxygen and hydrogen components, the resulting mixed gas you might call oxyhydrogen, and then burning that oxygen and the hydrogen back together again into water. So the byproduct of the process is water. They're burning the gas, the oxygen and hydrogen, and getting energy out of it. If this really were a legitimate method for running a car or running any engine, how is it that the scientists and engineers of the world had missed this for so long? That's the kind of question that a critical thinker would ask. If, in fact, it is true that such an engine can work, then perhaps the reason it has been quote-unquote missed for so long is that there is a conspiracy of oil companies. It also means that all conclusions in science are provisional. There is no such thing as 100% metaphysical certitude. There's no truth with a capital T. All of our beliefs have error bars around them. And as I said previously, not only do we have to assess what is likely to be true, but how certain or how confident can we be about that belief, knowing that we'll never quite ever get to 100% certitude. This also means that all of our beliefs are open to revision, that when new data comes in, or maybe just a better way of interpreting data or looking at the way things work, we have to be open to revising what we thought we knew. In addition to all of the flaws in thinking that I mentioned, human beings are also subject to delusions. Sometimes our thinking goes so far awry that we can invent beliefs, invent our own reality, or we can get swept up in the beliefs of others. One common manifestation of this is a public panic. Recently, psychics predicted that an earthquake was going to occur in Italy. This caused many people to actually flee from cities. The panic was so great. There were similar predictions made in New Zealand. These were based upon the false claim that the moon, the phases of the moon and the position of the moon controls or can provoke and therefore predict earthquakes. And again, without there being any basis in scientific fact, this caused a panic in the populace. Now, of course, there are earthquakes all the time. There is the normal background frequency of earthquakes. So there's always an earthquake of some severity just around the corner, especially in those parts of the world that are susceptible to earthquakes. And that can always be taken as confirmation about the prediction, whether or not the prediction had any new information in it at all. I also think it's helpful to consider thinking as a process and to focus on the process rather than on any particular conclusion. In fact, we should really invest in this process. Once we invest in a conclusion, I mean emotionally invest in a conclusion, then we start to twist facts and logic in order to fit that desired conclusion. And humans are very good at doing just that, rationalizing or twisting facts and logic to shoehorn them into a conclusion that we've all the executive who checks into a hotel, gets picked up in the bar, and then wakes up the next morning with his kidney missing while he's laying in a tub of ice. How plausible is that story? Should we believe it? Can something like that actually happen? But we are now awash in such stories, whether they're innocent and just fun versus malicious and trying to either steal our money or lure us into a scam, or maybe just to influence our voting. In a democracy, we are constantly subject to people who are trying to influence our political thinking. We also live in a capitalistic society, which means that every day we're subject to marketing claims. Marketing claims are highly motivated, in fact, to misrepresent the facts or to at least give us a very specific perspective. They're trying to influence our thoughts and our behavior. So they engage in what you might call persuasive speech and maybe even deception. Even when there are laws against outright fraud, marketers are paid a lot of money in order to flirt with that line. How much can they twist or misrepresent the facts without crossing over that line into actual fraud? And as consumers, every day, we have to sort through all of these deliberately deceptive claims to figure out which ones are reliable and which ones aren't. to reliable, or they may be assumptions. You may not know whether or not they're true, but they're just something that you're assuming is true. You also need to examine your logic. Is the logic you're using legitimate, or is it flawed in some way, or perhaps it's just systematically biased in a certain direction? You also should try to become aware of your motivations. People are extremely good at rationalizing beliefs when they are motivated to because they have a desire to believe a certain conclusion. Understanding your own motivations will help you deconstruct that process and will give you the skills to, again, lead to conclusions that are more likely to be true as opposed to the ones that you just wish to be true. And critical thinking also means thinking through the implications of a belief. That different beliefs about the world should all be compatible with each other. But we do have a tendency to compartmentalize, to just have one belief walled off from all other beliefs, and therefore we insulate it from refutation. But if you think, if this were true, what else has to be true, and does that make sense? And just continue that process, and that's a good way to tell how plausible and how likely to be true a certain belief or claim is. It's also a good idea to check with others, because no matter how developed your critical thinking skills are, you're still one person whose thinking is going to be quirky and individual. You have a limited fund of knowledge and a limited perspective. In fact, your knowledge and perspective may be limited in ways that you're not aware. You don't know what you don't know. So if you check your beliefs with others, it increases the probability that any of these holes in your thinking will be covered up. When a large consensus on a specific claim is achieved, there's probably a greater chance that that consensus reflects reality than the process of just an individual. There's no guarantee of that. A consensus may be systematically biased as well, but at least you're stepping out of yourself and the own limitations of your knowledge. It's also important to be humble, which means knowing your own limits. We tend to get into trouble when we assume we have expertise or knowledge that we don't have, or we don't question the real limits of our knowledge. The world's a very complicated place. Nobody could know everything. So we always have to be on the lookout for where the limits of our own knowledge are. And also be comfortable with uncertainty. There are some things we simply cannot know, or we just currently do not know. And there may be times when, after reviewing all the logic and all the evidence, our only conclusion is we currently just don't know. The level of uncertainty is fairly great. Let's give an example from popular culture, which I will frequently do throughout this course. There are those who claim that there is a large hominid primate living in North America. You may call it Bigfoot or use the Indian term Sasquatch. Is this a credible belief or not? How can we know whether or not Bigfoot is wandering through the forests of North America? Well, what are the implications? If there is one such creature, either he's the very last of his kind, or if it's a sustainable population, there must be a breeding population around somewhere, which means there's hundreds and probably thousands of these creatures around. Where are they all? What's the evidence for such a creature existing? Has anyone ever captured a live specimen, found a dead specimen, found a skeletal remains? Any completely objective evidence that is not susceptible to misinterpretation. The evidence that is usually presented is none of those things. No actual unambiguous specimens of Bigfoot. All we have are what we sometimes call blob squatch, fuzzy photographs through trees at the very limits of resolution and perhaps not excusing the absence of evidence. And mixed in with all of this, there are just out-and-out hoaxes, like the Patterson-Gimlin film. This is the iconic movie of what appears to be a Bigfoot walking through a campsite. And this is still presented by some believers as the best evidence to date of Bigfoot. However, the film is not incompatible with a simple hoax. There is nothing in that film that can distinguish it from simply a person wearing a costume. In 2008, to give a more clear-cut example, Matt Witten and Rick Dyer claimed that they found a Bigfoot corpse and that they had the frozen specimen in a freezer. They even went as far as to call a press conference and to try to elicit the help of scientists to test the DNA of their Bigfoot specimen. In the end, what they had was simply a stuffed Bigfoot costume, and they were exposed as deliberately concocting this hoax. Why did they do it? You know, people do weird things for weird reasons, but they clearly did it. So we always have to be on the lookout for hoaxes and deliberate deception, not just innocent or perhaps flawed critical thinking deception in these types of claims. Let's also go back to the UFO example I gave at the beginning of this lecture. Those are really interesting questions. Whether or not you think that they're very plausible that we could be being visited by aliens, what I find more interesting than even that question is, why do people believe that we're being visited by aliens? As human beings, we have the capacity for curiosity as well as reason, but we are plagued by a host of cognitive flaws and pitfalls that may lead us to even fantastical beliefs that don't really hold up to the cold, harsh light of scientific scrutiny. But the good news is that critical thinking can be learned. It is a skill that you can learn and that can be reinforced by habit. The scientific approach to critical thinking is empirical. It is a way of testing our beliefs systematically against the real world that is out there. Once we develop our critical thinking skills and really begin to examine our beliefs systematically, it can be extremely empowering. It's in fact a defense mechanism against all the machinations out there that are trying to deceive us, whether for ideological, political, or just marketing reasons. It's also very liberating. It liberates us from being weighed down by all of those false beliefs and perhaps mutually incompatible beliefs that we tend to hold because of our emotional makeup. So developing these critical thinking skills is both empowering, liberating, and a defense mechanism against the world that we currently live in.